Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. My name is Alan Bowser. I'm the president of Civic Federation. Thank you for joining us this evening for what we hope is a very productive and useful discussion for our delegates and our guests. We have some Federation business to take care at the outset of our meeting. The first thing is the approval of the agenda for this April 8th, 2024 meeting. I'd like to make one amendment. There are some items that were included in the minutes of our executive committee meeting last month that didn't find their way into the newsletter as standalone items. So we'll be asking for the delegates to approve the membership of our nominating committee, the membership of our awards committee, and two amendments to the bylaws for 2024 only that have to do with elections and voting. So with those, with that caveat, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda for tonight. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the agenda with amendments.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next order of business is the minutes from the March 11th meeting of the Civic Federation. They're found on page 8 of the newsletter. I know you've all read them carefully. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the March 11th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been first and second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Next order of business is our treasurer's report. I'll ask our treasurer, Jerry Garson, to make a treasurer's report.
The following is the treasurer's report as of April 8th, 2024. We operate on a fiscal year from July 1, 2023 through April 8th, which is basically 9 months. We've collected $1,801 in dues. We've had expenses of $2,087, giving us a net deficit of $286. Our current bank balance is $7,211. Is there any questions? Either send me an email or speak to me later.
Thank you so much, Jerry. With that Federation business out of the way, I want to turn the program over to our special guest. Jason Sartori is the director of the Montgomery County Planning Department, and his housing lead is Lisa Gavoni, who is a soldier through all these conversations. She was nice enough to be our guest speaker this morning at the April Committee for Montgomery meeting, talking about the attainable housing strategies initiatives. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jason and Lisa, please.
Sure. Thank you, Alan. So I'll just get real quickly, I'll just start and thank you for having us. This is my first time coming and getting the opportunity to speak with you all since I became director at the end of November of last year. And so always welcome over the years the opportunity to have a conversation with folks in the Civic Federation. So I'm glad that we're here today talking about, Alan, as you mentioned, the presentation this morning. It'll be a repeat of that for you in some ways. Presentation on attainable housing strategies, which many of you know that we started working on this. Oh, Lisa, what was it? It was about a little over 3 years ago. Yeah, so
March 2021.
Right. So it was early in 2021 that we started on this, and we've kind of had it on hold for a while, and a lot has happened around the country since we last worked on this. But now it's time for us to kind of turn our attention back to this now that Thrive has been adopted. And we are kind of reestablished with a new planning board. We wanted to wait until we had a new planning board to bring this forward. So we're going to the planning board for a work session this week. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Lisa, who really is the guru on this and can talk to talk through our presentation. And I'll be happy to answer any questions with her afterwards.
And Lisa, let me allow you to share your screen. And thank you, Lisa, for joining us again. And you've got the program.
Everyone see my screen?
We do.
Awesome. So, hi everyone. I'm Lisa Gavoni. As Alan said, I'm the housing planner. I lead housing issues for the planning department. I was just thinking about, the initiative and how long we've been working on this, and I remember a very lively meeting we had with the Civic Federation on this topic in 2021. So, in many ways, I'm very happy to be back to have this conversation with you. I always appreciate the thoughtful dialogue and questions that come from the Civic Federation. So, I just mentioned that this initiative started in 2021, and it's the result of a prior county council request for the planning board to consider and recommend, quote, zoning reforms that would allow greater opportunities for missing middle housing in Montgomery County. And attainable housing strategies is the resulting effort in which the prior planning board, so not the current planning board, they prepared recommendations to allow for the development of more diverse housing types of housing, including missing middle housing in the county. So I'm just going to be really quick. I think all of you know me by now, as I love my data points, but I'm going to start with just two quick ones. So, that speaks to kind of why we think this initiative is important. This is a chart that shows the price ranges for detached, and condos in the county. In 2022, the average detached home in the county sold for around $940,000 compared to attached structures that were sold for an average of $426,000. And we just, highlight the impact that size has on affordability. I think that, it's implicit in that the smaller the house, the smaller the attached structure, the more likely it is to be affordable. Certainly not all attached structures are affordable, and certainly all detached structures are not unaffordable. We think that size does have a big impact on affordability. And in the same vein, single family homes in the county are actually getting larger. And I've been showing this chart for a while now, and it just shows the average gross floor area by year built. But this is actually from SDOT, which is just shows the gross floor area, which doesn't include unfinished space or garages. So when we look at like DPS permit data, the reality is that single family homes in this county are getting much, much bigger. And the reality is a lot of what we're seeing that they're getting bigger is the tear down rebuilds in the county. We're seeing the transformation of many of our neighborhoods through this process where an entry level or more affordable home is torn down and made way for a larger structure that's relatively unaffordable to most people in the county. And under current zoning, this is allowed by right. And what by right means is you can go straight to the Department of Permitting Services for a building permit, and it requires no review by the planning department. It's a relatively easy process compared to the additional process that you need to build more types of housing like a duplex or a townhouse. And the hope with this project is that a lot of these tear down rebuilds that we see today will one day be multiple, more attainable, more affordable, multiple units like a duplex or small apartment buildings. And if we don't, make the changes if we don't make these changes, we run the risk of losing a lot of the diversity of our neighborhoods that I know many of us cherish. Slowly over time, neighborhoods will transform through the tear down rebuild process that will result in a loss of affordability. And even a small number of more diverse housing types like duplexes and triplexes can help combat this change. So jumping right into the initiative, the previous planning board agreed to, 3 overarching goals regarding attainable housing strategies. And the first is to increase opportunities to meet the county's diverse housing supply needs and obligation, as well as the county's economic development objectives. The second is really to meet a lot of our equity goals, to unravel the exclusionary aspects of the county's single-family residential zones to diversify the county's communities by diversifying the county's housing stock. And then finally, to create more opportunities for home ownership for more households in more parts of the county. And through this initiative, we also recognize that our terminology on this issue has evolved. We went from the beginning when we started this to just fully focusing on missing middle housing to a broader umbrella term that we're calling attainable housing. So what does that mean? So missing middle housing is a term coined by Opticos Design that describes a range of house scale, multi-unit structures that are compatible in scale with detached single-family homes. And what that basically means is you have a duplex, it's in the same box, same form as a detached home, but looks like it's but 2 units. But when we talk about attainable housing, that's a term we're using to include that house scale missing middle housing, but also medium scale and large scale housing products that are not necessarily house scale, but they're not necessarily housing we envision for the interior of our single family neighborhoods, but more along the corridors that were a big part of Thrive Montgomery 2050. So the previous planning board had a lot of recommendations related to attainable housing, and I'm gonna walk through them, and then we'll walk through a little bit more of the details, and then we'll kind of discuss next steps. So the previous planning board had some recommendations, and the first was to allow the creation of duplexes and triplexes. And many neighborhoods that currently allow single-family detached units by right, establishing what we're calling a priority housing district surrounding key transit stations and corridors, which would allow for reduced parking requirements, and the construction of quadplexes in our more walkable neighborhoods, and creating a new attainable housing optional method of development. And the optional method of development is, kind of the opposite of by right, our standard method. It requires planning board review and approval. And we think that that could be a way to spark medium density and more diverse types of buildings, like small apartment buildings and stacked flat and residential areas, but along the corridors. And then finally, leveraging the master plan process to identify opportunities for rezoning properties along the county's primary corridors to allow for higher density residential development. And what I'm really, talking about when we talk about these recommendations is, for the small scale, we're really focusing on allowing house scale multi-unit structures within our single family neighborhoods by right with the conformance with a pattern book. And in pattern book, we see as kind of a guide to help kind of dictate the form that we want to see. We see it more as a guide than like a strict requirement, just to really kind of show the kind of features that we want to see, where we want to put parking, things that we want to see like porches, and just kind of help, create good aesthetically pleasing housing. And then for that medium scale, that new optional method of development, the geographic scope includes most of our growth corridors and centers of activity. However, for those, we're recommending that new optional method of development. And then for large scale housing, our recommendation centers on future master planning efforts like the University Boulevard corridor plan that we're working right now on. And then you can see, as the scale increases from the small scale to the large scale, the geographic focus becomes more refined. So we go from the entirety of our single family neighborhoods and many of our zones, and by the contrast for the large scale process, that we recommend tools that become increasingly more elaborate as the scale increases. And these are the areas, the zones that we're really talking about. So we have R40, R60, R90, and R200. And these are zones that we call our residential detached zones right now. And that means that they primarily are used for the creation of detached homes. And so what we're recommending is that these zones, the R40, R60, R90, 200, they would now allow the creation of duplexes and triplexes in R60 and R90, and quadplexes in R60 and R90 near transit. And then for the medium scale, it would be these zones along our corridors, and the same for our master plans. I mentioned earlier that we have, that we're using a priority, we're recommending the creation of a priority housing district. That's a straight line buffer of 1 mile around the red line, purple line marked stations plus 500 feet from a BRT corridor and River Road inside the Capitol Beltway and Connecticut Avenue. And in the priority housing district, that would allow quadplexes and reduced parking standards. And this is just an example of the type of product that we're envisioning through attainable housing strategies. I mentioned a lot, the small scale, we're really focusing on duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, and that's it. But for the medium scale, along those corridors, we're thinking Stack flats, small apartment buildings up to 19 units, and townhouses up to generally 3 stories. And then for the large scale, through that master planning process, we were thinking about, we want to see live work buildings, more stack flats and small apartment buildings and townhouses, but up to 4 stories. And then, when we're looking at the picture for large scale, I know these look like luxury townhouses, but they're actually 3 units stacked on top of each other. So where are we in the initiative? So Attainable Housing Strategies was put on pause in 2022 to focus on the completion of Thrive Montgomery 2050. The Thrive is now complete, it's adopted, and where we left off is the draft report was nearly completed. We had 1 work session left with the previous planning board before things happened, and that was put on pause until we had a permanent and complete planning board. We have that now. So we're going to work through all of the previous planning board's draft recommendations with this planning board starting this Thursday. So why now? Why are we doing this, 3 years later? First, we think it's really important that we complete the county council request. We know it's been several years now, and if you saw that letter, you know that the council members that requested it are no longer there, and we have a different planning board. But they still asked us, they're still asking for us to complete this, so it's important for us to finish this. Second, Thrive has been adopted. We think Thrive does a great job of creating a framework and gives us policy guidance on this topic of diversifying our housing stock. And third, many jurisdictions, including our neighbors in Alexandria and Arlington, have adopted similar changes recently. And the county has a history of progressive housing policy, and an opportunity right now is ripe to really build upon that reputation. And fourth, this is nothing new to anyone here, that the county has a significant housing supply issue that's not getting any better. But to be clear, I think this will be one incremental step that could help housing supply, but certainly I don't think that overnight we're going to see a lot of duplexes, triplexes, and small apartment buildings. I think it would be similar to the ADU ordinance that we passed in 2019, where we're averaging around 50 ADUs a year before the zoning changes, and now we're averaging about 120. So not a lot, but still more than what we were getting. And then, finally, we think there's a significant equity issue at play. Whenever we talk about this, we just keep getting back to this is the right thing to do. At the root of this initiative is to make housing in Montgomery County more equitable and inclusive. The county, and including Montgomery Planning, has a long history of land use decisions that have created exclusionary neighborhoods and formed barriers to resources and opportunities for many people in this county. And then bringing us home in terms of next steps, we held a public listening session with the community on the 21st, where we had almost nearly 50 people come and provide comment. We received a lot of written correspondence too. Because this is not a master plan or a regulatory item, we can keep the record. There's no record, actually. We can take comments on the initiative throughout our work with the planning board. So we're still accepting comments and feedback on the initiative, and we will continue to do so until we finish in June. We are holding work sessions on the previous planning board's recommendations with the current planning board. We have planned 5 work sessions to work through the initiative. We're starting on Thursday with the medium scale. We're not starting with small scale just because there's so much there. And that's where we've really received most of the comments and most of the feedback. And the initiative will result in a report to be sent to the county council in June. We will brief the PHB committee, the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee of the county council in June. And we anticipate a resulting ZTA in late summer and early fall to kind of work through these changes. But just to give you a little bit of, structural, we're providing a draft report. That draft report we're calling what is a menu of options that would allow the council to pick selected parts of the report that they may want to implement through a zoning text amendment. They may want to implement all. They may only want to implement small parts of it. We don't know, but it's a report that we're hoping gives the council options for next steps. And then this is the schedule. Like I said, we're working through work sessions in April and May, in June, and then we'll brief the PHP committee in June too. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sure there are many questions.
And we have questions. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you so much, Jason Leeson, for the presentation. As I said at the outset, if you've got questions, use the raise hand function underneath the reactions button so we can take questions in order. First question will go to Jerry Garson and then to John. So Jerry, please ask your question.
We've seen that the governor has proposed the sale of only plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles after 2035, which is getting pretty close to this. With all these reduced parking standards, how will these new units charge their new vehicles? Or are we just going to say that you have to buy a used vehicle if you don't have a charging place for each vehicle that you own? And the second question is, how many narrow streets like in our area will have to become one-way streets so we can accommodate more on-street parking?
Sure. So I want to be clear that the reduced parking requirements, the reduced parking recommendations, they are not a requirement that you have less parking. It's just in our zoning code, you don't have to provide as many. So certainly the market will bear what the market would bear. And we think that there are going to be instances where, obviously you don't have to provide, that you're going to provide more than the parking minimum. In terms of charging, there's lots of other ways to charge your car at your house. My best friend has a car, lives in an apartment building, an electric car, and charges it in a public parking garage on the weekends. There are certainly other ways around that. I think that's, there are plenty of answerable ways to do that. In terms of narrow streets, I'm not sure. I don't envision that that's going to be a problem. There certainly we've passed things like ADUs, ordinance changes that allowed, more than one dwelling unit on a lot, and I haven't heard a lot about needing additional parking. Like I said, I think that we will see more housing types being built, like duplexes and triplexes, but I certainly don't think it's going to be an overwhelming amount on our streets.
Thank you for the question, Jerry. John, you're next.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. And my first question had to do with who the expected purchasers of these new houses are. Is this something where we're hoping that people are going to be buying themselves, or are these supposed to be rental properties, we think?
We're really focusing on that homeownership aspect. There was, and actually, there's this real estate newsletter that said that every new home in Montgomery County that was built last year was sold for over $1 million. And that's largely because of the only type of housing that they can build is the detached home. And so we're hoping to build more types of housing will help lower that price. Now, certainly I don't think it's going to be, deed restricted affordable housing, but I think it will be a more attainable product compared to what's being built today.
Okay, and in follow up to that, I was wondering if there was any push for legislation that would help push it in that direction so that it was available for people to purchase in that case.
So when we presented this to the prior planning board, we presented options for optional affordable housing deed restricted units that, if you had, right now inclusionary zoning only applies to 19 units and above. So obviously we're dealing with a smaller scale here, that if you were to put, if you had a small apartment building of, 15 units, if you put some of those in deed restricted, maybe you have a little bit more flexibility with your setbacks or your height. The planning board didn't go for that. We'll certainly bring up the issue again with the current planning board, but there's currently no plans for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, for your question. Alan Myers, you're next.
Didn't expect to be so fast. Can I call your attention to page 45 of the report?
Here, let me open it really quick if you don't mind.
Yeah. Actually, part of 46 too.
And for those of you who don't know, there should be a link to the Affordable Housing Strategies Initiative in the announcement for this meeting.
Are you talking about the engagement part?
Yes,
Sure,
Would you drop
Okay.
that in the chat, by the way?
I can drop
The
it in the
link?
chat.
yeah. The public meetings, I noticed that it just seems lack of interest because only half the people registered showed up. And I'm curious how you could have on March 29th more recording views than you had attendees by over twice.
Sure. So that's actually pretty common for registrations for a lot of our public meetings. People register, things come up, they don't. But we've always put the recording on the website so that people can refer to it and watch it later at their leisure. So that's how we're able to have more viewings after the fact.
Okay, then scrolling down, I hate my name to be taken in vain, but Maplewood Citizens Association, you have not met with us.
With
And I
Civic Association?
Maplewood Citizens Association.
That was 2021, but I'm pretty sure that I did.
No, first of all, we do not meet in October. And I have our minutes. I've been president of the association now for far too long. You have not met with us. East Bethesda tells me that you met with them in February of 21 when this thing was started, and you're coming to them on Wednesday night at their meeting. But I'm willing to offer you an opportunity at our meeting on the 15th of May to speak, if that would be desirable. But there has not been a meeting with this Citizens Association and with East Bethesda, so it casts doubt on some of these other associations. I haven't reached out to them, but I know for us in East Bethesda, there were no meetings in 2023.
I'll go through my records, but
Those were in 2023. Those were back in 2021. And I
Yeah.
remember presenting to the East Bethesda group.
Yeah, in February
Okay.
you did,
Yeah.
but I don't recall any meeting here. If you've got, I'd have to pull up our agendas and stuff, but I do not recall any meeting here.
well, it was in 2021. Alan can vouch for me that I presented to Park Hills in 2021. I'm presenting to East Bethesda on Wednesday again this
Yeah.
year. Again, if you want me to present on May 15th, that's fine, but I don't appreciate being called a liar. I'm not going to make up civic associations that I met with. I will go through our records.
Well, I'm not saying it's just, I'm just saying it's not accurate as far as I know.
Well, thanks for bringing that to our attention, Alan, and Lisa can check her records, and I'm sure you welcome her
Yeah.
offer to have a meeting with you in May.
Yeah, I'll put in the chat my phone number to you, Lisa, so you can call me and we can talk.
Anything else, Alan?
No, thank you. I'll appreciate it.
Okay, we'll move on to the next questioner, Daniel.
My question is, what steps is the planning department taking to prevent our homeowners insurance premiums from skyrocketing because the response time, which is what they base our town grading on, is reduced due to increased density on narrow streets in older communities? It's very nice to say that you're going to prevent the replacement of a affordable house with that of a McMansion, which of course I'm against also. But the occupancy load of a McMansion is still a single family load versus a duplex or larger. We have a much larger occupancy load, and that plays a big role in that formula that the National Fire Prevention Association bases their town grading on, which in turn the insurance companies base their premiums on.
Sure. So I don't know a lot about insurance. That's not something that the planning department has a direct role in. If you would like to send us a written comment about this issue, we're more than happy to bring it up in the report when we put it in our comment matrix to discuss with the planning board. But the planning board has very limited role scope in that.
Thank you for the question, Dan. Jackie Bocco.
Hi, when you're doing this moderately priced housing and you have by right, the developers can come in. I'm in an R60 neighborhood and our homes are, my home is less than 1,000 square feet. And there's 30 feet between our homes here. And is that is the current density taken into account? I mean, I was out there to Friends at Rockville and I was amazed at how big their lawns were and there was so much space. And I thought, well, here you could put in a duplex and it wouldn't make a big difference. But you put one in our yard, in our neighborhood, and it's intrusive. There's no place, and if you're not allowing any parking places either, we already have a lot of cars on the street. And I'm just, is there any sort of restriction in these sort of neighborhoods where there already is sort of a crowded density sort of type, even though they're single family homes?
Sure. So what we're looking at now, we're not looking to change any of the development standards that currently exist. So the setbacks, the lot coverage, the height, that should all remain the same as what is currently allowed today. Again, this is wholesale county changes based on your zoning, but certainly the zoning code allows for that specificity in terms of the development standards.
Well, we have had like just a couple of like McMansions put in, which are jarring, because they're so huge next to these small houses and they cram them in anyway. So I guess they're allowed to put in something that big. You're saying that's what the code allows?
Yes.
Okay.
So just on that issue, Lisa, I've got a lot of questions. No other people do. People says that one of the results of the attainable housing initiatives is going to be changes in zoning. You've been talking about changes in standards rather than changing in zoning. Can you explain that a little bit to people?
Sure. So what we think this initiative will result in is called a zoning tax amendment. And what a zoning tax amendment does is it changes the text of the zoning code compared to a master plan, which generally, results in the changing of a zoning of a property. So if you think about a master plan, if you're zoned R60, it might rezone you to CRT, which would then change the type of uses you're allowed on that property. A zoning tax amendment, what it does is it can change the standards, it can change the text of the zoning code. So what that would basically say is, right now you're allowed a detached house by right. You would be then allowed a detached house, a duplex, and a triplex through the standard method development. And so that's, the difference between a DTA and kind of a master plan recommendation. And one other thing, I did do a keyword search on Maplewood. The presentation was actually for Thrive, but we added on attainable housing strategies as like a second part of the presentation.
Yeah,
so that one might be the confusion.
I was just going to say, I took a look, I found it. There was an email exchange, Alan, between you and our former director, Gwen Wright. I think the meeting was supposed to be in September, but then it got canceled and pushed back to October because you had Andrew Friedson was also joining. And so it was primarily about Thrive, but then it's on both my and your calendar, Lisa. So I'm not sure which one of us joined Gwen to participate in that meeting.
I'm still not clear. I need to look at our agendas. We do not meet in October.
It was supposed to be in September.
But we do not meet in, but we do, September, yes, we do, November, but I don't recall Councilmember Friedson coming. I'll have to look at our agendas and see, but Lisa, also, I was trying to send you a direct message. I can't get you my phone number. So I was gonna look for an email for you. If you can want to send me an email or DM me on this on chat, I'll get it to you.
It looks like Jason has your email, so he can send it to me.
Yeah, Lisa, you might want to put your email address in the chat for us, please, so everybody can have that. Next question is Brenda Freeman. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you. Hi, Lisa. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Brenda. It's so nice to see you.
Lisa, I have a question because I understand that now there's going to be an emphasis on purchasing housing and condos, which I think is great. But I'm wondering if the county is becoming aware of the impact of realtor fees on affordability. When there are these transactions, evidently the realtors have been getting money on both sides. And I'm thinking that if there is a genuine concern about affordability, that would be something to look at. I don't know how much in the weeds you are with that yet, but it's just something I wanted to mention. And the other question I have is these corridors. They're talking about corridors, Well, everything is a corridor because, you know, it seems like there are buses all over. So what, is there some kind of limit on what is a corridor or what?
Sure, so there's, let me show you a map. I can. So we're talking mostly about the BRT corridors, which are called growth corridors and Thrive, which are generally corridors that allow BRT, but also Connecticut Avenue and River Road inside the Beltway. So that's generally what we're talking about, not every road in the county.
Okay, so in other words, there is a limitation. There's some type.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, let me ask my question, one of my questions now, because it is about the priority housing districts. And as I understand it from the report and from one of your slides tonight, you've got a radius of 1 mile from along the transit corridors. Is that correct, Lisa?
1 mile around the red line, purple line, and mark, and then 500 feet from the corridor.
So looking at a map today and trying to drive 1 mile rate, draw 1 mile radius circles. That takes care of all of Silver Spring inside the Beltway. If you go from New Hampshire Avenue to Route 29 to George Avenue to Connecticut Avenue, University Boulevard. There is every single family home, every R60 home, every R40 home inside the Beltway falls into a priority housing corridor. Can you confirm that for me, please?
Yes, I can also put a link to the web map in the chat that kind of like allows you to zoom in and see it.
I'm not I don't see that on my screen right now, but yeah, maybe new message. So the question is, the recommendations the staff is making would basically permit quadplexes throughout the whole of downtown Silver Spring. So it's a distinction without a difference. We're really talking about a proposal that would have quadplexes by right everywhere. So that's concerning to start with, but my confusion was, and I might have misunderstood you, but I thought that in previous discussions that I've participated in and watched, you were talking about, or it had been said that there would be the quadplexes that would be allowed by right along the priority housing districts, along those corridors, would be ones that face the transportation corridor, and that they wouldn't be a mile into the neighborhoods. Can you help me with that confusion and tell me what the intent of the planning staff recommendation is?
Sure. So I think there's a little bit of confusion that there's the priority housing district that applies to small scale. And that's that 1 mile and 5 around transit and a 500-foot buffer. That allows quadplexes and reduced parking. The abutting corridor applies to our median scale attainable housing. So it's townhouses, small apartment buildings. For those types of housing structures, you have to be on the corridor.
Okay, and does that mean that, you know, I did a radius, a circle that was at the Wayne Avenue, Dale Drive, Purple Line stop, proposed Purple Line stop, and a mile was almost over from Wayne Avenue and Dale Drive over to George Avenue, and way beyond Piney Branch Road on the other side. Is that what you envision as within the priority district, or am I still confused about it again?
Of course the web map is not working right now for me, but there is a 1 mile buffer on our MC Atlas, so I can look. But if you did a 1 mile buffer and that is included, then I'm sure it's right.
All right, so that raises my next question. So you're talking about a 1 mile buffer, and so I did some research today and went to Council of Government's website, WMATA's website, and the U.S. Department of Transportation website, and their distance from transit is 1/4 to 1/2 mile, not a mile. And so your recommendation is twice what the local and the federal and the regional recommendation is. Wondering how you came up to 1 mile, and some of our audience might think that's a bit excessive. What do you say about the walk shed?
Sure. So a couple of things is it was mainly borrowed from the accessory dwelling unit reduced parking requirements. So the 1 mile buffer around those areas allows for reduced parking for accessory dwelling units. So we borrowed that. Another thing is we did present options to the previous planning board about, do you want a walk shed? Do you want 1 mile? Do you want half a mile? And that's where they landed on. So it's, we're certainly going to bring this up with the current planning board, and we'll discuss this issue with them. And we'll see what they have to say, but that's where we are right now.
I would note, Alan, that with regard to the reduced parking component of this, the council recently adopted a ZTA that reduces parking or eliminates parking minimums within a half mile of all of these stations already. Within a half mile of Metro and Purple Line stations. And I also think BRT stations. So, there you have an example where they used a different distance to measure. And so, it's possible that with this, they may stay consistent with that. But keep in mind, that's also already eliminated all the parking minimums completely in those areas.
Well, that was one of my concerns, is that I'm aware of what the county council just did on the parking minimums, and it was a half mile, and a mile is pretty, it's a long distance, and it really does take into account all of the single family neighborhoods inside of the Beltway. I don't believe there's any place inside the Beltway that's not covered by that. So we'll revisit that at some other time. Tony, you're next. Go ahead, Tony.
I don't think your microphone is working, Tony.
Tony, we can come back to you. All right, we will come back to you, and I'll leave your hand up. And Cheryl Gannon, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So today I was looking through some documents on the planning board website, and first I saw a document that explains the Attainable Housing Initiative, and there was a sentence in there that jumped out and surprised me. It says the county is also mostly built out with very little land available for new development to help us build enough housing fast enough to keep up with this growth. And then I looked back on on another report on Silver Spring that says that there's 16 million square feet of unbuilt capacity, which I think is roughly the equivalent of about 5 Pike and Rose developments that could be built right now in downtown Silver Spring. And then I looked at the Advancing the Pike District report, which I think it might be a few years old, but it says that zone capacity has been slow to develop. And at the current pace of development, the sector plan zoning capacity will not be maximized for 50 to 60 years. And the report notes that job growth hasn't supported new housing, which is one reason why development has been slow. So my question here is in 2 parts. If you say that the market is demanding more housing opportunities, why are these approvals not moving forward and zone capacity not being utilized? And why is it necessary to densify single family neighborhoods beyond the existing ADU law if there is in fact significant zone capacity not being utilized right now? And then my last part of this question just relates to land banking, where development ready land increases in value, and whether or not we have a problem with land banking where developers are buying up land and then sitting on it, creating more scarcity for us.
Sure, I might need you to repeat parts of that question, but I'll start with the pipeline question.
Okay.
So we've actually done a significant amount of, well, we are doing a significant amount of work of understanding why our pipeline is not moving forward through our local housing targets project, where we're trying to meet the county's housing obligations. And we're trying to better understand the pipeline and why projects, some move forward and some don't. The county has a pretty low conversion rate for a lot of pipeline projects, but it's not even throughout the counties. Like the average conversion rate over a 6-year period is around 50% of projects get built off the pipeline, but certainly in places like Clarksburg and Bethesda, it's closer to 80%, and North Bethesda, it's much lower. The reasons that projects don't move are varied. You know, it could be hard to get financing. It could be that the zoning's not enough. It could be the rising inflation rates. It could be the higher construction costs. There's a lot of different reasons why projects don't move forward. And I also want to say, you know, when we talk about, you know, the county's mostly built out, we're largely talking about greenfield development. We don't have a lot of farms left to redevelop, but we do have a lot of what we like to call parking lots to places. We have a lot of underutilized parcels that are, we think, ripe for redevelopment, but they're a little bit more complicated and harder to build, making the economics a little bit harder to work out. So it just takes a little bit longer to build housing in this county because all the easy sites are gone. And what was your second question?
Well, so just is it, well, I guess you've answered it. Is it really necessary to densify single family neighborhoods when there's so much zone capacity? And I guess your answer would be because the zone capacity is not moving.
I think, yeah, I think if we need housing, we should continue to zone for housing because we don't know who's going to use the zoning capacity and who's not. I think that also a lot of times, a lot of zoning is left on the ground. You know, I give an example of the AVA Wheaton and Wheaton. They built a 4-story building with, you know, 200 units. They had enough zoning capacity to build a tower and over 500 units, but they left a lot on the ground for a lot of reasons. You know, the market wasn't supporting steel and concrete, but it could support a wood frame building. And that just shows like the complications, the project by project variables that go into figuring out like what projects move and what projects don't.
And the one thing I would add too to this is that one of the goals of Thrive is to provide a variety of housing options for a variety of housing needs. And so one thing that we get with, you know, that capacity that you talked about in areas like downtown Silver Spring or in North Bethesda is more of the high rise type of, you know, apartment type of units, whereas, you know, what this would allow is a type of housing that we don't really have much of in the county, the duplexes or the triplexes, which, you know, there are a lot of communities that have these and people don't even realize, you know, you go to a lot of like Northwest DC and there are duplexes and triplexes all over the place. And you know, it's just providing more options, more types of housing at more price ranges.
So my follow-up question is, over the years, planning has pointed to really 2 twin goals: increasing ownership opportunities for wealth building and improving affordability. But 95% of the multifamily housing that was built in Bethesda since 2017 has been rental properties. And that seems to be the trend in Silver Spring as well. What will you do to make home ownership opportunities come from this attainable housing initiative? What tools will you use? And related to that, how will you prevent investors from buying up single family homes to convert them to multifamily rentals? And what tools will you use for affordability besides that the units will be small?
So that's a great question. I want to be very clear that a lot of the issues with building condos are at the federal level. It has to do with financing the projects, and it's just really just like basically to build a condo, you have to build it and then you have to sell it really quickly. And then there's different FHA rules about like how many can be rental units, and it's just very complicated, which like the planning department does not have a role in, unfortunately. But we, you know, I would point to Thrive. There's other tools that we have for homeownership besides the attainable housing, which we're trying to make a more attainable house point. I would say community land trust is one. That's something that we're looking at. Today, we actually had an all-day Thrive workshop where we're kind of trying to focus on concrete actions that we could take to kind of start to implement Thrive. And one of the ones that came out of housing that we really want to focus on is community land trust. Community land trust is also not the easiest thing to get off the ground too. It requires basically a lot of land assembly and a lot of vacant land. In fact, we don't really have a vacancy problem in the county, but that's one tool that we're looking at too. So it's not just attainable housing strategies, it's other things too.
But so the ADU law requires an owner to live on the premises in one of the units.
Right.
That be a tool that you could use for these plexes, require at least one of the units to be owner occupied to keep the investors out?
We could. I mean, we started this initiative kind of looking at the subdivision laws to kind of make it a little bit easier to subdivide and create, you know, homeownership. Because the reality is, like, if you have a quadplex, no one wants to go into the expense of building like a 4-unit condo structure. So it's a very tricky thing. And that is something that we're looking into, is how do we make homeownership of these units more attainable, to use the word. But that is something that we're looking at too.
And then what are your thoughts about other tools for affordability besides size of the unit?
Well, I think we mentioned earlier that we'll bring up creating a mechanism to potentially create deed restricted units within these through optional incentives. That's something that we were interested in last time that the previous planning board did not go for. There's also a lot of other tools, affordability tools being worked on in the county right now. I'm on part of a senior housing affordability group where we're trying to make a mechanism to create more senior affordable units in the county. I'm on an MPDU work group where we're trying to make more flexibility within the incomes with the MPDU program. So again, this is just attainable housing. I just want, to be very clear. This is one part of the county strategy to meet the different housing needs, whether it's affordable housing, home ownership, or just supply of housing.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll come back to some of those issues. That Tony Byrne, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Jason and Lisa. I appreciate the selective elimination of parking minimums. We're seeing that across progressive communities all over the country. And, constant conversation in my neighborhood is our kids, can't really find a place to live in Montgomery County. I've got a kid living in Brooklyn where he can have a nice walkable life, and he doesn't need a car, and he would like to be able to do that in Montgomery County, and he can't. And so I think we'd rather that whatever it is, $70,000 or whatever it costs to create a parking space, that be put towards more housing. So kudos to you for kind of aligning with best practices from a lot of other communities there. The question that I had was around townhouses. So you had that nice colorful graphic with the 3 colored boxes around the different categories of housing. I think the one on the left was the peach one that had, I don't know, maybe like the most attainable. And it was basically about essentially being able to create duplexes, triplexes, and maybe quads. And I was wondering why townhouses aren't more pervasive. Why aren't townhouses in that left-hand category? Because if I think about ways of, if we're really trying to retrofit more housing into the built environment. I know in my community, there are lots that could support 2 or 3 townhouses. And I'm not sure that this would actually, and there are people who would want that. And so it's not clear to me why that was selectively excluded.
Sure, and one thing wasn't, I wouldn't say like a value judgment. Townhouses are very much a part of attainable housing strategies just along the corridors. We really were focused on the house scale for the small scale development. Certainly we think that townhouses are a really important part of this, just not for the interior of single family neighborhoods at this time. There are ways to build townhouses already in R60, but it's just, you need a much larger usable area, like 3 acres, I think. So it's possible, you just need a large tract of land.
But I mean, if we're talking, I guess, to Cheryl's point about home ownership and the ability to essentially have more people enjoy the fruits of our neighborhoods, I don't know, it seems like an unusual exclusion to me to not, be able to figure out a way to selectively, it's not like our entire neighborhoods are going to turn into townhouses, but certainly there would be space for a good dozen of them in my neighborhood if somebody was really motivated to do that, and we have the space to hold it. And it feels like a great way to increase the number of people who can enjoy the fruits of this wonderful community. So I guess I'm just puzzled why it wasn't included.
I think, Tony, too, the thing when you talk about, a property that could have 2 or 3 townhouses, in a way, you're thinking of like the typical townhouse linearly arranged. You could do that, and that could be a triplex, right? Or it could be a duplex, of 2 units that are linearly arranged and 3 stories tall. And fits within the confines of the size and shape that's currently allowed of a single family home. And so it at a certain point, it just becomes a question of definition of what is a duplex versus what's a townhouse. And that was one of the things I remember we had to kind of change the definition of a townhouse at one point, or we created a new definition called them, or we suggested the creation of a new definition, a new term called the multiplex. And so there's, at a certain point, it becomes, if you're talking about 6 or 7 units, then you're going to need a lot more space. And that's what we were reserving to only go through the optional method that would be on the corridors.
And so the optional method wouldn't be available in like your standard R60 zone.
Right, only on the corridor, right, Lisa? I just want to make sure.
Right.
Yes, it's been a while since I've dug into the details of all of this.
We can come back to you a little bit later, Tony, for another question. Jerry Garson, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. We see there's a very small utilization of mass transit on the Red Line rail corridors. We see that in the morning, only 1,376 people got on the train at Grosvenor. At North Bethesda, only 823. And in Rockville, 1,079. And in Twin Brook, 1,072. That adds up to only 3,350 people currently are even using the Red Line. When you look at the Flash, the 101 on 355, which is supposed to be a major bus corridor, we see that they're only having about 450 riders a day in each direction. And we look at 29 on the Flash, we see there are only about 1,100 riders. How can you justify all this additional housing when almost no one takes mass transit in Montgomery County?
Well, I think, we talked a little bit about this earlier, that transit is certainly part of the conversation. We certainly don't expect every single person to take transit in Montgomery County or from these units. We also don't think that it's going to be a sizable increase in the amount of units. Like I said, we expect incremental change in the county, similar to what we saw in the ADU ordinance. I think it's important that we provide the people the ability to live near transit so they can take transit. The more people we put near it, the more people that will take it. I take transit every single day because I live near it and it's easy. So I just think it's putting more people near transit is an important part of our housing strategy.
Yeah, Jerry, I would almost turn the question back to you and say, if you thought, if you think about what Glenmont is right now, right? It's the end of the Red Line, and if that Glenmont shopping center area there were to redevelop with more housing, it would probably attract more people to take that metro station, right? So, maybe there aren't as many people taking it because we don't have enough housing near where those stations are yet. So, if we can kind of consolidate and put the more housing in those areas, we'll have more people using those services.
But let's look at Glenmont. They only had 2,000. These are February figures. The latest I have, I don't have March figures, but there were 2,045 people who got on in the morning at the Glenmont, which has multiple buses going there and multiple people from different directions. We see the mass transit ridership is very small, and apparently you're not recognizing when most of DC is going to be shut down due to global warming, when most of downtown is going to flood, and the Red Line will not be in operation in DC. So, you're planning for all this housing without even discussing what is the effect of global warming. We've seen just in the last 2 weeks, major flooding in the downtown area, especially around the tidal basin. We've seen major flooding in Alexandria and in Arlington. You're not planning for the future. You're just looking at what is the past and hoping we can convince all these massive number of people to only take mass transit to their jobs, which are probably not even in DC.
Thank you, Jerry. Andy Leon Harney. Next question. Thank you.
Thank you. It's sort of a multi-pronged question. First of all, given the fact that most of the planning jurisdictions throughout the country and planning associations recommend a quarter to a half mile, not a mile, to trudge to public transit, seems to me that that's something that the planning board should revisit. But what I had a question about is the plan to respect the existing setbacks, height, and massing restrictions in single-family neighborhoods. What is the planning board's approach to that? Because, for example, in section 3, where I work as village manager, our setbacks have historically, since the very beginning, been 30 feet, whereas the county's front setback is 25. If we want, we have a lot of places that have very deep yards, but we also have very tiny lots as small as 6,000 square feet. So the question is, how is this attainable housing effort going to respect municipal side, front, and rear setbacks?
Sure, that's a great question. I actually had a meeting with the MML I think last week, and we brought up this issue. And the report actually has a section about municipalities that we understand that your setbacks are more restrictive than the county, and that actually you're empowered, I believe, by state law to have that, not county law. And we're certainly not going to jump in and impede that. So if that is what your municipality says that you want your setbacks to be, that's up to your municipality.
Then 2 other questions. One, when you mention corridors, everyone understands what a corridor is and they're called out in your report. But today, and forgive me for not carefully reading, today I heard corridors mean Connecticut Avenue, River Road, and 500 feet behind them. Is that correct? 500 feet is
for the priority housing district. For the medium scale, it's just the properties touching the corridor.
But where is the 500 feet that you mentioned then?
The priority housing district that would allow quadplexes.
And where would that be?
The BRT corridors and Connecticut and River Road, that comes out of guidance from Thrive.
Okay, and then what considerations are you all making for stormwater runoff, which is a very serious problem in a lot of municipalities, and the county has not invested in new storm drains in many areas, such as our community, where we are starved for storm drains?
Sure, so that's part of the report too. We do have language in the report that discusses a lot of the environmental and stormwater issues. As you can imagine, that has come up a lot. We think that is an issue and that the county should investigate ways to help stormwater. We think that processes that apply currently to tear down rebuilds should apply here, and that they should be, equally studied together as an issue. That what's not necessarily part of this report, but just an issue that we cite for further study.
And I would say, it's kind of, that's a standalone issue that needs to be looked at regardless, right? Because even with what we have today, with that tear down and the rebuild of a much larger home, that's still an issue today. So we should be looking at that.
It should be linked to any permission to build, because if you just say, finally, we're getting attainable housing through, and you build things that are 1, way too far to walk to public transit, and 2, flood every time it rains because there aren't storm drains adequate to the new lot coverage, which may be greater impervious lot coverage, that they should be not separate tracks, but they should be linked, it would seem to me, logically.
Yeah, the tough thing is to kind of place a burden on an individual property owner to how much do they need to, whether you're replacing it with another single family home or with a duplex, like what is the burden on that property owner to resolve the stormwater runoff issues of the entire road or the entire neighborhood, or just their 60-foot, frontage or whatever it might be, right? So it's, that's where we kind of have to look at it from a more kind of social, broader perspective of the county, like what can we be doing kind of countywide to resolve some of the stormwater issues.
So basically you're telling me you're moving forward on your prong and the county should move forward on their prong.
Well, the county, and the county is moving forward on all of this, or at least they're moving forward on the housing.
I haven't seen that.
Well, the county's certainly moving forward on the housing front. The housing front is a major priority for the county, knowing that people are coming.
I fully understand that. What is the impact of I haven't seen the latest iteration of the governor's affordable, attainable housing legislation. So I'm not sure where that fits with this, but I'm sure it does. Do you have any insights? I realized that today was the end of the session, so.
Sure, I think we're still waiting on final language to see what it passed, but from last I understood, the affordability threshold was lowered from 25% for 15% near transit, 0.75 miles away from transit. And if you build 15% affordable as defined by the state at 60% AMI or lower, you get a 30% bonus density. And that could be stackable with local provisions too.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you from Chevy Chase. Alan Myers, your hand is up. You have a question?
Yeah, I did. Just an apology first. You are correct. This was all during the pandemic. And I think my confusion stems from the fact that this document doesn't say when the meetings took place. I suspect that 13 that you see there is the number of people who were attending via Zoom, because that's when we were holding our meetings. So that's my confusion, is why I didn't have paperwork or any records to show a meeting outside of our normal time. So I do apologize for the confusion on that. Although I think it might be worth clarifying when the meetings actually took place. It took place in the context of Thrive. Nancy Abels brought it up, and we were dealing with Thrive more than the attainable housing, because attainable housing was just sort of an adjunct at that time to Thrive. So I did send you my email address. But one of the things I would like to point out with respect to our neighborhood, we're sandwiched in between two corridors, actually three if you consider West Cedar Lane. And Old Georgetown Road has one bus line on it, the J bus, and I think there's also a ride on. Rockville Pike has the ride on, no Metro bus on it. And at least north of us, south of us from West Cedar Lane, the J bus is on Rockville Pike. But we have the worst intersection in the county there at West Cedar Lane and Rockville Pike. And if you add additional density, and while you may draw a circle from the medical center metro stop that shows us within a half mile, walking it isn't, especially from a good portion of the neighborhood. So if you throw higher density on Rockville Pike, you're only going to add to that tremendous amount of congestion and getting in and out of this neighborhood. Maybe.
Thank you for your comments. I think, comments like that are important to hear. Certainly we're, like I said, we're compiling a comment matrix for the planning board to consider these types of issues, and we'll bring it up to them.
Maybe we'll address that if you come on the 15th.
Sure. I'm more than happy to come on the 15th. I'll check my
Call me. I left you my phone number in an email. I'll just send it to you.
Sure,
Please.
sounds good.
Thank you.
I'm glad that Maplewood is getting together with the planning board staff. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Alan. Jackie, you have a question?
When they're considering this reduced parking that's supposed to be, along these corridors, so that it will force people to use the public transportation, or the people who would use it would move into these spaces and stuff. But I want to say it's just really unfriendly to families with children. It's unfriendly to seniors. I'm somebody who didn't have a car for the first 2/3 of my life, and I would have to buy groceries and have them in my backpack and go and take them on the bus, the subway, and the bus to home. And if you've got kids, it's really difficult. And for you to reduce the parking, my husband still used public transportation every day, and I had the car to go the grocery shopping, whatever errands I needed to run with our kids, so I just want, I kept thinking all the county council people don't do the grocery shopping for their family, or they would realize you need a car. It's very difficult to schlep groceries especially and the kids, on a bus. Just throwing that out there. I guess I don't really have a question, but
That's fine. Jackie, have you heard of Instacart? No. No, it's much more expensive on Instacart. No, I certainly understand. I walk to the grocery store with my car every Saturday, but I know that, not everyone has that, that ability. And, I think you also spoke to, maybe you don't have two cars, but maybe you only have one car, your car light.
We have one.
So there's other options besides, car free. There you can be car light, and, there's certainly other ways out there to meet your grocery needs.
Oh, okay.
we'll pick up a lot of our suggestions when we comment on the Attainable Housing Initiative Study draft. Sheldon Fishman, you're next. Welcome, Sheldon.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one is planning beyond zoning. And if you look at the Forest Glen Metro, the Wheaton Metro, the Glenmont Metro, basically the red line, right around the metro, you don't need any new zoning, but we need people to move into high-rise mixed-use buildings right on the metro so they don't drive down Georgia Avenue. So I'm all in favor of that, but I guess my question is, beyond you don't need new zoning in any of those three metro stops. And in fact, the metro itself has actually, over the years, issued RFPs to encourage development at those metro stops. So what arrows do you have beyond zoning? What planning arrows do you have beyond zoning to get mixed-use, high-rise buildings at those right at those metro centers, metro stops, so people who want to take the metro to work every day and without maybe not take the metro to go food shopping, but take the metro, those one single person car trips, every single person car trip that you can eliminate by having somebody living and choosing to walk to the metro and take the metro every day is great. So my first question is, what tools do you have beyond zoning? What planning tools do you have beyond zoning to make it happen at Forest Glen, Wheaton, and Glenmont?
So the great thing about being the planning department is our primary tool is zoning. There are other departments and other county agencies that look at other tools. For example, there's an incentive on WMATA-owned land for a pilot, which is a payment in lieu of taxes, which is a tax abatement that would basically, you don't pay property taxes for a certain amount of year in exchange for high rise and certain affordability requirements. So that's one tool that the county has been using. I don't know, Jason, do you know of any other tools that the county has?
Pilot was the one I was thinking of. I think it's 15 years abatement, right?
Right. But it's a huge tool that is a huge incentive to build housing, especially for women.
If I could ask my second question, which is probably going to be also equally uncomfortable, if you take a house and you turn it into a duplex, you get twice as many housing units. That sounds like a success. If you take and it is a success, but if you take a $400,000 house and turn it into a duplex with two $700,000 condos, then you've actually reduced the affordable housing by one. You haven't increased it at all.
Sure. I think what we're trying to do is make a competitive process to the tear down rebuild. Certainly, we think that these two are going to operate in the same market. Certainly, the average tear down in this county goes for well over $1 million. So if we're creating two 700,000 duplexes compared to a $2 million tear down replacement home, I think that that's a good trade-off. I'll be honest. I think that that's more attainable to more people than the current tear down.
But my point is if you do it by right, you're going to do my neighborhood, which has $500,000 homes and $400,000 homes. And by doing that, you're going to decrease the amount of affordable housing in the county, not increase it.
I think that we're already seeing the transformation of our neighborhoods through the tear down rebuild process. If they want to do it for a duplex, they're going to want to do it for a tear down. In fact, I can tell you as part of this process, we've been interviewing small builders to understand the likelihood that they will use this. And you know what a lot of them say? They say, in Montgomery County, we're just going to keep building tear down replacement homes because that's a model that works. It's a model that's proven. And we know that we are expanding our model. You know, it wasn't too long ago that you didn't see many of these in Silver Spring, but you're starting to see more and more pop up every year because they're running out of these types of affordable homes to raise in the western part of the county. So I think we're just making a competitive process to what exists. It's going to operate in the same exact market. If they want to build a duplex instead of a tear down rebuild, I think that's great.
Thank you, Sheldon. Naomi, you're next.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Naomi.
where do master plans fit in this?
Sure, that's a great that's a great question that we're actually talking about right now in the form of the University Boulevard plan. So we were, Jason and I are laughing because we were literally just talking about that before the call. We're trying to figure that out. Certainly for the large scale, stack flats, 4 stories, you can rezone to CRN, which is the least dense mixed use zone. But when we're talking about, the medium scale, small apartment building and townhouses, we're trying to create the master plan guiding language to figure out what that means. And I know that I don't have an answer for you right now, but to tell you that that is something that we're working on right now, trying to figure it out. This is all a work in progress. But the University Boulevard plan will be the first plan that we try to figure this out with. So it's currently a work in progress.
So I guess what I don't see is if you add to the uses in single family zones, then how do you, is there any way to exercise control over what parts of an area of a neighborhood that might be eligible maybe are not subject to changes in the uses? Does that make sense? I can try to be clearer.
Maybe, I think I do, but if you could rephrase it, maybe.
Okay.
No, sure.
Without a master plan process, the uses change for every property that's zoned, say, R60. Would the master plan process allow a certain amount of picking and choosing and respecting unique characteristics of the neighborhood? Just for one potential example, in my neighborhood, stormwater is one issue, of course, narrow roads is another. My neighborhood is essentially landlocked. The only way we can get out is on Wisconsin Avenue. I don't know if that's something that would be considered, but how do you mix the change in uses in the zone along with taking into account, which is generally done in a master plan, unique characteristics that deserve attention?
Yeah, so through a ZTA, you can't be as specific as you can be with a master plan. But with the master plan, what you have to do is you have to change the zoning of each parcel if you want to make that change. And so what Lisa was talking about, that we're having this conversation right now about the University Boulevard corridor, is where we've got R60 or maybe R90 along University Boulevard. Do we want to change the zoning of those properties to be able to accommodate the type of density we envision along the corridor? And so we have to work with the zones that we have available to us. And so she mentioned the CRN zone. When you're talking about the duplexes and the triplexes within our single family neighborhoods, it's difficult. We can't, through a zoning text amendment, say this parcel, but not that parcel, but not that parcel, very specifically. But what we can do is say something like within a quarter mile of, or within 500 feet of, or within a mile of. And so that's what we're getting at with the priority housing district. Is so we're saying duplexes and triplexes could be allowed in the R60 zone, but quadplexes only within this particular distance, the 500-foot distance of these corridors, right? So that's not saying your property, but not your property, but it is in some way kind of doing that, right?
Well, then that sets up much of the Bethesda Chevy Chase area for the same issue that was raised with Silver Spring, where every community essentially within the Beltway would be affected by that, which drastically changes the communities. I get it. My second question is, I don't understand how you're going to deal with ownership in the plexes. If the condominiums are difficult, then how does these become wealth building?
I think that's a great question. That's one that doesn't necessarily have a home in zoning, but we are working through that issue with trying to talk to people that understand this a little bit better than that understand the outside the zoning process a little bit more. Certainly we are talking about, it's a little bit easier for like duplexes and triplexes when they can all be next to each other and you can subdivide, but it's those quadplexes that make it a little bit more difficult. It's certainly why I said it's difficult to have a condominium. It's certainly not unheard of, and it's certainly possible. So that I think is our only solution right now for the quadplexes, but it's something that we're actively looking into.
How can you subdivide an R60 lot that's less than 12,000 feet?
No, I'm just saying that's something that we could do. If you read our report, we talk a little bit about subdivision. It's something that we wouldn't tackle necessarily with a ZTA, but an SRA, which would be like potentially a future step.
And you said a moment ago you had been talking to some of the smaller developers. One of my questions is, how do you know that there's a market among both consumers and developers for this type of housing?
So I think there's an overall market for housing. That's pretty strong. We have a very, very low vacancy rate and a very small supply of housing right now. So I think people just want more housing. In terms of the small builders, there are some that are interested in. I think that there's some that are not. I'll be honest. We talked to them and they said they had no interest in doing this. And there are some that have said, you know, if it could be a proven product, we will certainly look into it. It's just, it needs to be proven that it could be, you know, you can replicate it. And it's that, you know, it's a comparable process to what exists now.
And times have also changed a little bit, right? I think there was one developer that we spoke to 3 years ago that said, we don't think we'd probably stick with our bread and butter single family replacement homes. Now they're saying, well, maybe we might consider these, right? Because just the market has changed for them. You know, with a lot of the things that Lisa mentioned before with, you know, interest rates and construction costs and everything changing the game for them.
The other part is like, we can also look at Arlington. We've had a lot of discussions with them and they didn't think there would be that much interest, but they actually got a decent amount of permits when this first started up. So I think that we can look at, you know, across the river to see what our neighbors are doing too.
What's a decent amount?
I think it was like, I don't want to overspeak, but it was, I think when the first couple of weeks, there was like 17, but it was just like the first couple of weeks that it started. And then it had like increased a decent amount. I'll have to look up the exact numbers, but they said that they were surprised by how many they had received, that there was more than they thought that would be coming in for permits.
I guess it just seems to me that a lot of the people who want prices to go down want larger units than maybe 1,000 square feet. So do you see that there's a matchup?
I think so. I mean, I look at myself, honestly, and I look at like a lot of my peers that if you told me homeownership is attainable, but I'd have to live in 1,000 square feet, I would certainly take that up. And I know a lot of friends and similar. I think that homeownership is a really attractive thing. I think just being able to have more options for housing, I think is in general a good thing.
Thanks, Naomi.
Okay,
that was very helpful. It's great to see you. And if you have more questions, circle back because I'd like to encourage everybody to get their questions asked and answered. John, you're next.
Thank you again. I'm thinking about 20 or 30 years from now. You know, this has already been implemented and all of the houses are filled. I'm thinking about what that's going to do on the current public services and what the plan is for how to keep the school district as good and competitive as it is currently. Especially just coming from somewhere like Philadelphia, which has a comparable budget per student, a comparable budget for the entire school district, but has 30% more students. It's disastrous.
Sure. So we're actually working through the growth and infrastructure policy update right now, where we are considering a lot of these issues. One of the recommendations we're considering is actually creating a student generation rate just for these housing types to better understand their impact. Certainly, like you said, it's not allowed right now, or if it is, it's very much older product. What we can show is that, what is allowed in the county right now is we'll call 2/2s or stacked flats, which is basically a unit, 2 units, one on top of each other. And so we looked at the student generation rate and it somehow lies between the middle of multifamily low and single family attached. So it's between those two products. So certainly we're studying the issue right now to better understand the impact, and it's something that we will follow through subsequent updates of the growth and infrastructure policy.
Okay, and so I guess I just want to follow up on that really quick. What I mean is, it seems like in order to properly prepare for a larger student body, just funding isn't really enough. Packing the schools with more students isn't really a good option. There would need to be some sort of plan in place for the creation of totally new schools. And that's something that would be best done in advance of all of the students sitting there in the seats. Is there any sort of merger in these ideas with existing plans?
Sure, so
Yeah. Go ahead,
so-
Lisa.
No, I was just, Jason, you're more than happy to fill it. I was just gonna say, to further clarify, we do study this issue and we do follow it, and we will. We coordinate with MCPS regularly on their CIP projects, and we provide them with the data necessary that they need to help make projections and better understand the impacts of the policies that we're making that will continue with this policy and beyond this policy. That's something that, we don't see changing. Jason, what were you gonna add?
I was just going to say, I mean, I want to keep in mind too that the quality of the school system goes well beyond the capacity of the schools, and I think that the county needs to make sure they're making the right investments in terms of the school system to maintain that quality in numerous regards, not just from a capacity perspective. But one of the things we're seeing in the short term is that we don't really have much of a capacity issue actually in the schools. We're kind of seeing coming out of the pandemic enrollments that are a little deflated, and that doesn't mean that it's not deflated at every school, right? Or there are schools that aren't deflated and that are overcrowded. And one of the things that we need to take more seriously as a county is, you look at our down county areas. We keep saying we want to put more housing there. We want to have more family-sized housing in, downtown Silver Spring and downtown Bethesda, in areas that are already dense, but there's no space for schools, right? So what do? We need to be able to co-locate schools and recognize in some of these areas, it's okay to have an urban school, a school that might occupy, part of a building along with something else. That may not have the fields, or it could be a special program that's located there, and that relieves some of the overcrowding at other schools that have, the fields and things like that. So, we need to think a little bit more creatively about how we accommodate the enrollment burdens that we have in some of the areas where we don't have the space for new schools.
I'd like to think we all agree that we could do more for school construction and Silver Spring in the East County. Harriet, you're next. Harriet?
Lisa and Jason, thank you for your presentation, and I really appreciate your time. My first question was going to be about the housing bill you mentioned that would provide for a bonus density. I think you said 30% on projects that had 15% affordable.
Yeah.
But I think I just looked it up, and I think it changed to 20%, because my question was going to be, why would we give a bonus density for something that's already required in many of our planning areas?
That's a great question. So we actually had the same concern. What it was, I guess it came out of the House 15%, and they probably changed it back to 20% in the Senate, which is good. That was our concern, that when we talked to GHC, and basically they said that it's entirely possible that the state defines their affordability thresholds the same or close enough to how we provide MPDUs. So there would not be any incentive to provide more, but they would then get a 52% bonus density, which we obviously had concerns about. But now that you said that it went back to 20, that is better. But I want to be clear that the bill wasn't written for Montgomery County. There are other counties in the state that are not as friendly to affordable housing as us. And so we were supportive of it, but there were a lot of counties that were not. So they're just trying to get those counties to do what we're doing already.
All right. Okay. My second question is, now that you brought up University Boulevard, my community is adjacent to that, and my question relates to if the attainable housing is approved in that plan, what would the timing be? Because if it's based on having a BRT, as you probably know, the University Boulevard BRT is very far from being constructed. It's not even under study. There are at least 4 other projects ahead of that. Funding is questionable. Would this plan be approved and developers can go forward with increasing density on the single family lots, even without any start date for the BRT? I mean, I don't even mean a start date, just even a construction date, which is sometime in the very far future.
Sure, I think that's a great point, but it would be allowed. I think that one of the underlying framework policy guidance of Thrive is to provide appropriate and higher densities along the BRT corridors to be able to support that future BRT line. So that's, part of it. I'm sorry if you can hear my cats arguing behind me.
We love cats. Harriet?
Okay, so you're saying, let's say you approve the plan next year, then within sometime next year, these could be constructed, even though the BRT might be 25 years away?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not sure why it's a corridor then. Why it's a corridor plan if there's no, transit?
Sure, so I think we wanted to identify it as a corridor and Thrive as a growth corridor, a place where we want to see growth. And that's part of what we're doing on University Boulevard, to set up that density into those land uses to support the future BRT. It's part of, it's not that much different than when we did all those Purple Line plans before the Purple Line was built too. It's just providing appropriate density to support the investment that the county's making in a high capacity transit.
But the Purple Line was an already approved plan with a funding plan when those plans were done. I'm just making a point here that there are other BRT plans further along, but you're starting with the one that's like the lowest on the priority list. That's all.
Sure, thank you. That's a valid point.
Thank you.
And I would just make the observation that those of us who live along the Purple Line alignment were promised by members of the county council and the state of Maryland that there'd be no upzoning that was related to the location of a transit stop along there. So we take a lot of this with a grain of salt. Ira Unger, you're next.
I'm sorry for the delay. I want to take back something to my Civic Association meeting, and so I have some very basic questions. One, Alan mentioned before that the corridors, 1 mile from the corridors would mean everything within the Beltway for the ability to build quadplexes. What about beyond the Beltway? How much of, say, Silver Spring, and we are outside the Beltway in Silver Spring, how much of that is covered by this area of 1 mile from corridors?
Lisa, can you show the map again? I think
Yeah, that's what I was planning on doing.
Because as Lisa mentioned earlier, unfortunately, the web map that we can provide you the link to is currently down, and we don't have the ability to fix that ourselves. So we'll have to let our IT folks know tomorrow, and they can get
it would be those white nodes, but like I said, we're going to send you this presentation tomorrow, and there is a web map that will hopefully be back up tomorrow.
So you're saying all the white areas would be within 1 mile of corridors?
Right, yes.
Okay, and
I'm sorry, just to clarify, it's within 1 mile of the stations. And then with the corridors, you can see like the blue line that runs up to Olney, right? That's buffered by a white area. That's the 500-foot distance from the center line of that corridor. Right, so that's not a 1 mile. We're not doing 1 mile around the corridors. It's just 1 mile around the stations.
So every red dot then is a 1 mile radius from that dot.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. And then the second question is, when would this kick in?
Oh, that's a good question. We don't know. We're anticipating a zoning text amendment resulting from the study in either late summer or early fall. I would imagine that it's going to take us a lot of time to work through this with the council. I think the ADU ordinance was introduced in January and it passed in July. So I don't expect it to be a quick process.
So these recommendations have not been accepted, is that right?
We haven't finalized them. So these were the recommendations from the last planning board from 3 years ago, about 2.5 years ago. And so now starting this Thursday, we're gonna be working through work sessions with the current planning board to see if they want to modify these recommendations in any way. And then we're planning to present to the council in June the recommendations, not with a zoning text amendment, not with any proposed zoning change language, just simply saying, the planning board recommends allowing this type of housing in these types of areas in these particular locations, and basically walk through that with them, then have the council say to us, we like this, we don't like that, go forward and, prepare a zoning text amendment with our staff to do X, Y, or Z, and then we'll work on that. And then it'll go through the whole normal public process of a zoning text amendment where it'll get introduced, there'll be public hearings, there'll be opportunities for,
Right, that was my next question.
Yeah.
So after you give this to the council in June and you get their feedback, how long do you think you'll be before the next step where it goes to the planning and there's public input?
I would say it really depends on the appetite that initially the Planning, Housing and Parks Committee has for this, right? If they and I would suspect that there's going to be some interest, right? If you think about the makeup of that committee, you've got Councilmember Jawando, who introduced the ZTA that was an impetus for a lot of this work. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, who was a member of the planning board when we were working on this previously. And so I think that, and Councilmember Friedson, who has expressed a strong interest in trying to find new ways to get more housing in the county. So I suspect that, as Lisa suggested, probably sometime late summer or so, we'll see a zoning text amendment get introduced that would implement some component of this.
So we're really talking about this fall, possibly.
Fall, and then typically when they, again, like Lisa mentioned, it took 6 months really to get through, to get to adoption of a ZTA for the ADU change. So it may be early next year, and then there'll be a delay in when it takes effect, but not too much of a delay. So, yeah.
Okay, so you think maybe by the end of this year, or early next, there'll be opportunities for public input?
I'm not going to commit to any particular, because really at a certain point it's out of our hands. It's really
I'm just asking for an estimate, not a commitment.
Yeah, I would say probably no sooner than, late fall is, before you would see something that would take effect.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ira. Carrie Lamari.
Hello, Lisa and Jason. And I don't want to get this wrong, but the way I understand the website, in our development capacity since 2019, we basically approved between municipalities and the county 85,900 housing units. I mean, that's what the chart says.
So that's our zoning capacity. So that's not just.
Let me finish. Okay, I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm just giving you a little background here for my question. Well, that indicates to me that there's a lot of potential density to deal with the 200,000 people that will be coming in, in the next 20 or 30 years. I guess my question is, why are we looking at this at by right rather than, okay, you mentioned that CLT is being considered, Community Land Trust, and I think that's wonderful. I think that is the best way to create affordable housing, and if you use it in conjunction with attainable housing strategies, I think that's a winner. I think you can make something really, really positive happen. But that doesn't work if the rest of the county can redevelop, using using the attainable housing strategies by right. I think the benefit is if you structure it so that for a public purpose, affordable housing, you have the right to use attainable housing. I think if you go into everyone being allowed to do it, you could, in effect, have a problem. And my second question, I guess, is the relationship between tax abatement and the attainable housing. I understand that your goal is to stimulate housing starts, okay? But I would argue that a tax abatement program could create serious problems because, we have things like the Kerwin Commission. We can't even fund that. Somebody's got to pay for the infrastructure needs for all these housing units. And we have an entire action report that has numerous things, whether they be tree preservation, new tree, tree canopy, reapplications, stormwater management, the list goes on and on and on. So when you talk about increasing the density, but then creating a tax abatement where they're not going to have to pay property taxes for 15 years, the rest of the public is, I can see where that is a problem. And we've already done that with the 8,000 housing units that Hans Reimer had approved, they're near transit stations. I hope you understand everything I'm saying, Lisa, so maybe
Sure.
you can explain it.
I think there's a misunderstanding because we were talking about the pilot in the context of the WMATA pilot. So there's generally only 3 pilots in the county. There's WMATA owned property, there's a by right pilot for affordable housing development, and then there's a standard pilot for affordable housing developments for them to negotiate with the HCA and finance. Those are the only pilots that we are discussing. We're not talking about pilots in the context of attainable housing strategies. That was just a question that someone had. So I'm sorry for that confusion. For your other question about the residential capacity analysis, the residential capacity analysis was basically a study that we did in support of Thrive that looked at the remaining residential capacity that we had in the county to build housing in the county along with the municipalities. And it, it's based on a series of constraints and assumptions that we made on the topic of redevelopment. I would say that yes, you're right. We have zoning capacity like every other jurisdiction in the county that has a housing issue. Zoning is not necessarily the problem we have, but it's certainly, we need zoning to build the housing that we want. So we need to continue zoning if we want to see housing. And if we're not getting those 85,000 units, maybe they're in the wrong place. Maybe if you look at the map of the residential capacity analysis, we have zoning capacity in places up county where maybe we, like the ag reserve, where we don't want to see development. Maybe we need to further concentrate it down county in places like our single family neighborhoods that have access to transit and opportunity. So I think, I would take the residential capacity analysis, really important part that informed a lot of our recommendations for Thrive, but I certainly wouldn't glean a lot of, saying that we shouldn't zone or build more housing because we have all this capacity.
No, I'm not saying we shouldn't build more. In fact, from what I understand, 44,800, I believe, is or 43,800, I can't remember which, have already been approved, and they're actually ready to build, ready to go for the permit stage. So, I mean, I think we've already got a pipeline of well over 120,000 for housing for well over 120,000 people. But in any event, there has to be a relationship, in my opinion. Okay, I mean, the real need is affordable housing. Let's be honest here, because the attainable housing, wonderful, the pipeline, wonderful, but to create affordable housing, if everyone's competing for attainable housing, I doubt if we're going to get very much. I mean, not affordable housing, attainable housing. I doubt if we're going to get very much affordable housing. But if you don't make it by right, now you're creating a different animal, and you're creating the opportunity, you're giving opportunities to create affordable housing. And you're going to see a lot of your nonprofit, your nonprofit providers jumping on the bandwagon saying, hey, if I can do it by right because I'm creating a community land trust, you'll see that happen. But if you make it by right for everybody, I just see the property values going up like they did in Chicago. You
Well,
know?
I appreciate your input. Like I said, I think that, I think by right is an important part of this. We have to make it competitive to the tear down replacement home model, or it's never going to happen. But, I appreciate your input, Carrie.
All right.
Let me
no
let me
problem.
follow up with some of what Carrie was getting to. So one of your goals, maybe the second slide that you had, was on the equity piece, and that we feel it's the right thing to do, and we want to make it more equitable. If you really talk about equity, and this is a point that was made by one of your speakers at the public hearing, doesn't there have to be a conversation about affordable housing too? I mean, doesn't there at least have to be a paragraph in the executive summary that says, although we realize that there's a need for affordable housing, this focuses on attainable housing. What is the planning board doing to address, which is the bulk of the new housing need in the county, which is for people who are workforce housing, or public, first responders, or people who drive buses and work in restaurants? Is there a piece in your shop now that addresses strategies for affordable housing? Because a lot of our members are interested in that. They can see that housing prices are $1 million going for $800,000. That's clear. What they don't see is new home attainable home ownership for people who right now don't have the means to buy the really expensive housing.
That's a great question. I would, I mentioned earlier that today we had an all-day Thrive workshop where we just focused on concrete actions. And I would say the bulk of what the housing group focused on was affordable housing. Like I said, we talked about community land trust. We also talked about what's in our shop, whether it's making it easier for religious institutions to build on their land. Like a ZTA just passed that allows them to go through the conditional use process to build affordable housing on their land. That was a Thrive action that was already adopted. We have, things like creating an affordable housing ombudsman so that they can help navigate developers through the development process. So those small developers that want to build small affordable housing can do so. I would love to say, we are working on, Jason and leadership is working on a strategic plan that's going to help kind of focus where the planning department has influence over. I think that you all know the planning department's our biggest influence is zoning, so a lot of our actions focus on that, but that we can still do a lot for affordable housing. So I think that when maybe we get a little bit farther in that process, we can come back to you. We can discuss over email or a meeting about some more concrete ideas beyond just attainable housing that we can undertake to help support the development of affordable housing, because you are right, it's a huge need in this county. The gap is growing, the rents are rising. There's a lot of things that we can be doing that we're not doing that we need to be doing.
Thanks, Lisa. You are great. And let me take opportunity to ask one more question.
Sorry, actually, Alan, if I could just highlight one thing, and if it's possible for me to share my screen on something, I just want to show something that I presented to we have to do semi-annual reports to the county council twice a year. And this was from my semi-annual report to the council just last month. And so one of the things I want to highlight is, and Lisa talked about that there are a lot of things that we are focused on and looking at, how, and I mean, broadly the county, about the need for affordable housing. But this is some things that I saw recently that really struck me as being really telling. If you take a look at the change in our population in the county, this is low-income population, the population that makes up to 3 times the poverty level. The change in population from 2005 to 2022 increased about 90,000 people, right? Our high-income population, those making more than 5 times the poverty level, increased about 70,000. But our middle-income population, those making between 3 and 5 times the poverty level, decreased. So it's kind of interesting because it's suggesting in some way that we need the affordable housing for this growing population, but we do not have housing in our county that is affordable to people in the middle income range. So they can't be here. And if you take a look at from a share, our high income share, 52%. It's the same as it was 17 years ago in high income. Our low income population has grown 5%, but our middle income population has decreased 5%. as a share of the overall population. I think this is really important for us to take, to take into consideration. We can't just focus on the affordable housing for the lowest income. We need to also focus on being able to have housing for people in the middle income to be able to live here, to get first-time homes, to be able to grow a family here. So this is, I think this is really important for us to keep in mind.
I agree, Jason. That's a great chart. Thanks for sharing it with us. Lisa, my question before Sheldon asks his question is, can you tell us a little bit more about the pattern book and the process by which, I think in one of your previous conversations, you said there was going to be a community engagement piece to the development of the pattern book. We like sort of neighborhood, how do you call it? Neighborhood scale houses. We're interested in that process and whether or not our members will have a chance to participate.
Sure. I'm going to share this slide from when we gave the presentation because I think it's real. I think the pattern book is a really important part of, this discussion that I probably don't emphasize as much as we could. So what we envision for the pattern book is that it would be required to conform. You would be required to have conformance to the pattern book. And we think that this is something that should be implemented at building permit stage, graphically illustrate objective form-based development standards, remove arbitrary words like character or compatibility, and ensure parking does not diminish the public realm, and elements to maintain that house scale that we've talked about and size, including elements like porches, stoops, and lead walks. And these are, just an example that the pattern book should clearly provide recommendations that clearly articulate massing, neighborhood details, that's, the things like porches, things that bring it to the street, on-site parking, building placement, and frontage design. This is just the kind of examples that we want to avoid, unsafe conditions, excessive asphalt and unattractive buildings, and lack of porches or stoops that really, we want to great houses for great neighbors. And we want to, create and ensure safe and attractive residential streets with trees, landscaping, and sidewalks, adequate parking that does not negatively impact walking, rolling, and transit action, and simple buildings that look good and are economical to build. And then, like I said, porches, stoops, and front yards. We envision this something to happen after we work through the ZTA process. We want to work with the community on this. We want to create housing that fits into your neighborhoods, that is good, well-designed housing that creates, good, that has neighborly features, but are simple in design. We don't see this as something that we think will hinder the development of small-scale housing, but we think that it could really help create the type of housing that we want to see.
So two quick questions. Do Arlington and Alexandria have pattern books that are best practices? Nobody has it then. So
other jurisdictions do have pattern books. I think Norfolk is a good example. I think South Bend, Indiana also has some. There are other jurisdictions that we've borrowed the idea from, but not our neighbors.
And then a question which just popped up in the chat that Jackie asked. You're saying that pattern book conformance, there'll be no legal requirement for that. There'll be no way to hold homeowners or developers who want to subdivide their property to the pattern book guidelines?
I think we're still looking at the mechanisms. I think that we do see it as something that you need to conform it to get your building permit, but we're still working through what exactly that looks like. We need to get buy-in on this pattern book idea from the planning board and the county council, and then we'll kind of work on the mechanisms to get there.
Thank you, Lisa. Sheldon?
Yes.
Sheldon, before you go on, Lisa and Jason, can you stay with us for a few more minutes? We've got 12 questions. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Cheryl Gannon will have last question, and that means Andy goes, and Harriet, if your hand is up, Joyce, and then Cheryl. But Sheldon, go ahead.
My question is about, first I wanted to say that my neighborhood enthusiastically supported low-income housing development at Forest Glen Metro. So I tell you that only in terms of, that's another pilot that is not a pilot, but you should look at and for lessons learned, and support from the civic associations across the street from it. And just to say that I'm not a NIMBY, at least I don't think I'm a NIMBY. So in terms of the pattern, I wonder if the by right duplexes, you might consider, do the houses there in the neighborhood already have driveways? Because if they don't have driveways, doubling the number of housing units is going to increase the number of cars, which is going to make the streets more congested and more dangerous. Do they have sidewalks? Do they have driveways? And how wide are the streets? And maybe you can fold that into the pattern, which is to say, we're not going to put a duplex in if none of the houses have driveways. We're not going to put a duplex in if none of the houses on the block have a sidewalk on both sides. And if the streets are not below a certain width, we can't afford to increase the number of cars on that street by adding a duplex.
We can look into that. I mean, I think we haven't had the pattern book conversation with the board, and we haven't had with the council or the community. So what kind of goes into it, we're still under evaluation, but a couple of slides show you like where our current thought is.
Okay, Andy?
Yes, thank you. And thank you guys for staying so long and answering all these questions. I'm a little bit confused about the difference between when you pay attention to a master plan and you are now talking about doing a ZTA, which has a less inclusive, although there are some public hearings, it's a much faster moving, all-encompassing thing that doesn't take into account the master plan. So when do you decide this is something that should be in the master plan, not in a ZTA? And what do you envision in this ZTA that you're talking about?
Sure. So a master plan is, a visionary framework for a certain small area of the county. It usually deals with property by property zoning that results in a sectional map amendment that rezones property. A zoning text amendment is something that will make wholesale changes to a zone or a certain amount of zones. It could be, for us, this is a zoning text amendment because we're talking about countywide and we're talking about the scope of the entirety of these zones. A master plan wouldn't deal with the entirety of the zone. That's something that a zoning text amendment deals with.
So you're not going neighborhood by neighborhood. You're going to do a sweeping zoning change that reflects the goals as defined in Thrive.
Yeah, yes, it's a good way to look at it.
So the zoning text amendment that you envision happening starting sometime over the summer and reaching a conclusion in the fall would be to remove all single family zoning, essentially.
We're not removing it, we're just changing the standards. You can still build a detached home if you want to build a detached home, we're just making more options.
You're opening it to
attainable
housing. Okay.
Yes.
Right. And there are still other zones that aren't touched by this. There generally are larger lot zones out in areas where, we don't really try to focus having growth anyway.
So just so I'm clear, you're going to do this even though we don't have stormwater linked to it because that's another department, and we don't have the school system because that's another department. So we're just going headlong into this without those other pieces of the puzzle.
We're also saying
hope that they come along.
Well, there's also just by having the zoning text amendment doesn't mean that suddenly every neighborhood is going to double in density, right? You may have someone who was going to tear down and rebuild with another single family home. They may choose to do a duplex. They may not. They may still do the single family home. We're not going to see like an overwhelming change that this is going to have beyond what, so again, part of this within the single family neighborhoods is really about undoing the exclusionary aspect of the historically exclusionary aspect of our zoning, our single family zoning. That's a thing all across the country. And you see places all across the country that are saying, oh, we need to undo this. And that's part of what that is.
I understand that, but I'm just looking at the Silver Springs study, which showed that the change in zoning did not result in particularly affordable townhouses or properties. And that was, I believe, a study that was done by the planning board, if I'm not mistaken.
That was
And
based
so
on,
you did learn something from that, right? That
right, I think we've been pretty clear that this is not, we're not building income restricted affordable housing here. We're creating creating a competitive process to the existing tear down rebuild process that hopefully will create more attainable housing types compared to a new detached home.
okay.
Two
Thank
more,
you.
just two more questions, people. We're going to take Harriet, if you've got a question, and then Joyce. Jerry and Alan, if you want to put questions in the chat, please do that. Harriet?
Hi, thanks again for taking so many questions. It's been very informative. I just wanted to touch again on the pipeline. Lisa, I think you had mentioned that you have been talking with developers to find out why our pipeline isn't moving. And it sounds like, you know, a lot of the attainable housing project is modeled after Arlington and Alexandria. I don't think they have quite the pipeline that we have. And so I was just wondering, will there be any follow-up report about why our pipeline is not moving?
Sure.
Like, is there any formal study or just a report or something? Thanks.
We've been going around with that. I think, so I don't know how many of you are aware of the Local Housing Targets Project, but it's basically a project where we're trying to meet the housing goals of the county by setting realistic and attainable housing goals for our planning areas in the county. And as part of that, we're examining our pipeline because the pipeline is the best opportunity to meet those goals because the goals only go to 2030. So we've been doing a lot of analysis of our pipeline currently. I think the next stage is to kind of figure out more of why these projects aren't moving forward. I think that there's a lot of very complex reasons why they're not moving forward. We haven't identified, a particular next step. We've put around, having an intern call all the developers on the pipeline and ask them, like, why isn't the project moving? We've thought about making it a work program item. We just don't have any specifics right now, but it is something that we feel is really important. We feel it's really important to get these projects moving off the pipeline. We don't want to approve units and have them sit there. We want those units built. It's just a matter of, the mechanism to how we get there. But you're right. It's concerning that we have 31,000 unbuilt units in the pipeline. Those are 31,000 houses that people could be calling home, but they're not built yet.
Thank you for that question, Harriet. Joyce, you have the last question.
Well, I actually have three things, but I think they're short. I mean, one is a question for Jason, which he can give at the end, which is you had that chart of who's moving in and who's moving out, and it was done on multiples of the poverty level. Could you attach dollar amounts of income to that? And the second one is, when I watched the presentation to the planning board on this, there was a question about why triplexes and quadplexes were not in the larger lots from, I think it was one of the planning board people, but I honestly don't remember. And the response was that out there, it was more rural, there were narrow streets and there's not the drainage and so on. And I guess I would simply point out that our older down county neighborhoods have much the same problem. There are no storm drains where I live. We just got a flood in the street. There are narrow streets. And so I would simply ask what the mechanism would be for taking those kinds of issues into account and figuring out what it makes sense to put. And my neighborhood is one where you want to put quadplexes. And I guess the third question is the one on, or comment, and I think I heard you say that in looking at what you would put where in terms of things like storm drains and drainage off the property and so on, that you would look at it. Currently, I mean, I live in a tear down neighborhood and drainage is an issue when the big houses go up too, and flooding next door neighbors' houses when those go up is a problem. I mean, there have been several instances of controversies among, new people moving in and so on. And, I've heard said in various quarters, well, it will be by right. And since it's not required now, it won't be required in the future, which seems to me, we've got an existing problem. Let's fix that problem while going forward and not make it any worse. And I think I heard you say that you were looking at the whole picture, including putting, when a new house is constructed, what happens to drainage and so on. And Jason, I'm not talking about dealing with it for the whole neighborhood. I mean, I understand your thing of the person putting up the house, but what are we doing to make sure that if somebody puts a big building next to me, that I don't get flooded out? And I say that as somebody who did a renovation to our house where the contractor, the builder, the architect did a lot of work figuring out what to do with the drainage that was going to come off our property, you know, and not sending it to my neighbors. So I guess that's three things. And thank you very much for coming and being patient with all of our questions. Nice to talk to you guys again.
No problem. It's nice to see you, Joyce. Can you, that was a lot of questions. Could you maybe take question one first, if you don't mind?
The question one was about those income brackets. So I could just tell you that here it is. Nope, that's not it. Here it is. So the up to 3 times the poverty level, that was the low income population. That's about $83,000 for, I believe, a household of 4. Lisa may know whether or not that's correct, but then our high income population of over 5 times the poverty level is over 139,000.
And what was the second question?
What's mid-level though? The ones that we lost, where were they?
That's between 83 and 139.
So that's really a pretty, for the county, I mean, the median income, as I understand it, is a little over 100.
It's like 100. So the 100% AMI is about 140,000, I believe now.
40?
The median household income just for all households is like 120-ish.
Okay, so if you take the rule of 3 times your income is what you can afford, you know, the $140,000 is something of $420,000, which is not something that's going to come out of the attainable housing that's being suggested. I'll just throw that out as a thought. When we talk about housing for low to moderate income, and it seems to me that we really do need to be focused on the people in that mid-level, which are not going to be able to afford a $700,000 home.
But I would also point out what Lisa showed, that the average attached home in 2022 sold for $400 and something thousand on average, compared to well over $900,000 for a single family detached. So people are saying $700,000. I mean, the average attached home in Montgomery County, just now, it was a year and a half ago in 2022, sold for in the $400,000 range. So, you know, the smaller homes, the attached homes do sell for less.
No, I understand that. And I understand housing prices are different in different parts of the county.
Yep.
And I think we need to, though, think about what this program would do in terms of disruption, in terms of overcrowding, in terms of problems to infrastructure in older neighborhoods or other neighborhoods that might have various issues with it, and what we're getting in return for what's being done. Because I guess my personal interest would be, I think we need to focus on the folks that are in that, you know, low and mid level, and, you know, really look at that.
I think we can do both. I think that there's certain tools and there's certain things that we can pursue in each. I don't think that, you know, doing attainable housing doesn't mean that we can't focus on also affordable housing too.
Yeah, well, I guess I would make affordable housing be the main priority, because I think that's where our big problem is. But, you know, I just wanted to get out I wanted to understand what the numbers are.
Sure.
On that. And my other question had to do with the, you know, narrow streets and drainage and those kinds of issues in older neighborhoods, which already have the problem. And I guess to confirm that if you were putting even a duplex into one of these older neighborhoods, that would probably create a drainage and a perhaps flooding or basement flooding, at least, problem to the neighbors, that those kinds of things are at least how to address them is at least being looked at.
It is, we do have sections about it in our report. You know, if you feel that language needs to be stronger and you want to send us a comment, you know, please let us know. We'll discuss it with the board in one of the work sessions.
You know, and I guess somewhat related to that was the question of looking at and taking into account what the conditions are in existing neighborhoods, since you did look at it with looking at the, R200s in rural neighborhoods and said, well, we don't want to crowd them up because they don't have the streets and they don't have the drainage. And when in some of our older neighborhoods here that have been here for well over 100 years, many of the same problems are going to come up. So one really does need to think about what one would do about it and in addressing that.
Okay, thank you for your comment. I think that
have you thought about the fact that those same issues are in many of our older neighborhoods, narrow streets and so on?
we have, I mean, we've heard it from a lot, people that have commented on us. We certainly are taking into account all of the comments and feedback that we receive. So that we have definitely heard that before, yes.
Well, why don't we bring this conversation to a close, since it's 9:45, and we have some other business to attend to. On behalf of the Civic Federation, I want to thank Lisa and Jason so much for joining us and giving us so much of their time this evening to ask questions. We will package whatever questions we have and send them on to you for your consideration as you continue the draft and the process with advising and recommending to the board about the final product for attainable housing. But thank you guys so much. Lisa, you've been very supportive of our work over the course of the last several years, and we're always glad to have you. So thank you, and more later.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you everybody for hanging with us for so long. I hope it was a productive conversation and you learned something. If you have any comments you'd like to make about the attainable housing study, we did include a link to it. I guess it was in the chat. We also included a link to it in the notice for this meeting, so you can check out their recommendations. We did not take an opportunity to give comments to the planning board when they had their public hearing on this document at the end of last month, because we had not had this discussion and we wanted to get the benefit of your comments. So if you have any comments and suggestions, please send them to us. We hope to have a resolution in our May newsletter, and maybe we'll be able to get it out to you before. Housing issues has been one of the defining issues of this year of the Civic Federation, and obviously we'll be talking about the affordable housing question and the attainable housing study over the next several years, it seems like. So that's what we have today for our program. There were a couple of things I wanted to share with you that, as I mentioned at the outset, were not included in the newsletter. So bear with me. Let's see what we're doing here. You guys see that? Can you see that? Am I sharing the screen and you all can see what I have on the screen?
Yes.
Somebody say yes, please.
Yes.
So there are a couple.
Yes, we can see it.
Thanks. So there are a couple of things that we needed to do before we as we look at elections for ending this Civic Federation year. There's some things in our current bylaws that don't apply to us because we're not meeting in person. And so the executive committee discussed and approved amendments that we want to get those of you who are still on the call to endorse. And so that's what's on the screen right now. Regarding elections, it says that the top thing is the current bylaws rule. It says that officers shall be elected at the annual meeting in June and shall assume office at the close of the meeting. The proposed amendment is that to be ratified the membership, that officers shall be elected by the annual meeting in June and shall assume office at the close of the June meeting. So to facilitate having elections and officers by the June meeting, we're proposing this bylaws change. And so can I get a motion to approve this change for 2024 only? That was one of the things that we talked about at our executive committee meeting. The bylaws, current bylaws stay in place, but this is an exception for 2024 because we haven't been meeting in person. So can I get a motion to approve this?
Can we have some discussion first?
Well, you move it and then you second it and then you have a discussion. Correct? So can I get somebody to move to approve this?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion. Harry?
Okay. Personally, I mean, as a former president, and I've been around for a long time in the Federation, it's highly irregular that we alter the bylaws just before a potential change in the leadership of the group. I would suggest we table this until after the next president is involved, and then have a larger discussion. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't think any organization should change their bylaws just immediately when a former president is leaving and a new president is coming on. Personally, I think that's just bad form, but that's my opinion.
Any other discussion? I mean, the reason why we're doing this is because we can't vote in person. And that's the rule we have regarding voting. And that's the next thing on this page before you.
But we can go back to meeting in person. That doesn't mean it's that we started the online Zoom meetings only because of COVID. I don't foresee this as a permanent solution to our problems in the Federation. We've been doing this for almost 100 years, and online, I mean, in-person meetings, they have a lot of value. In fact, I would argue that Zoom meetings really take away from the discussion because you lose so much. That's just my opinion.
Alan, can I point out something? Looking at the articles of incorporation or the bylaws, you need 2 seconds to go forward with these amendments.
Is there another second? Daniel seconds it. Okay, so we've got 2 seconds. More discussion?
Yes, I've got my hand raised. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Carrie, this is a one-time only just for this year. It's not a permanent change in the bylaws. As long as we're meeting remotely, I do think we have to make a change. But there's one word that I think needs to be moved, and I can't get my screen to go up higher. It says officers shall be elected by the annual meeting. It either has to be at the annual meeting in June or at a meeting in May. By, what does by mean? Do we have a special meeting between the meeting in May and June?
It means no later than.
Well, then that means the meeting in June.
No,
Not
I mean,
at the annual meeting in June, not by the annual meeting.
so our meeting is on June 10th. That's the second Monday. And obviously we have this tight time frame. And this is what we discussed at the executive committee meeting. We're going to, if this proposal goes forward, we're going to vote by email balloting. And so we're going to do that between between the May meeting and June 10th. And that's why we had that by the June meeting, because we're going to we'd have electronic ballots, all delegates would get ballots, and then they would send them back by a date sometime in May, and then we would be able to announce the officers at the annual meeting, and they would assume office at the end of the close of that meeting.
Okay, so it's the by is only relevant because we're voting electronically.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any more discussion about this elections piece?
Yes, Alan.
I have my hand up also.
Go ahead.
Who did you call on?
Jeff, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to share the experience we had in Parkwood. We dealt with the very same issue a couple of years ago. And for the very first time, we did in fact vote remotely. And we got 3 times as many votes as remotely as we would have gotten at our typical in-person meeting. So I would say, while I appreciate Carrie's point, we had the discussion about the officers, we had adequate discussion of the issues, and the turnout for voting was significantly higher in that particular issue than we have had in the past.
Thanks, Jeff. Alan?
My only thought was, is this something that's going to be temporary or is it going to be permanent? I'm wondering why we're going so far as to amend the bylaws just for something that may revert back.
Well, because we have bylaws and this provision is just for this year where we're meeting remotely.
Because you could just suspend the bylaws, that portion of the bylaws by 2/3 vote and have the same effect.
We could do that. I didn't think about that when I was making that proposal. I thought people have an issue with suspending the bylaws having to do with elections. At least this gives some guidance and some rules about how we were going to do that. And that's
I don't care either way. I just pointed out as a fact.
okay.
Yeah,
Peggy?
Augusta, I'm sorry.
Yes, okay, again on wording. Paragraph B says voting shall be by email balloting or by hand count at in-person meetings. Since
We're
not
just
having-
Peggy, we're just on the first piece right here, which
Oh.
says regarding elections A and B. We haven't even talked about the second piece yet.
Okay, thank you.
Any more discussion about this first piece, which says that officers shall be elected by the annual meeting in June and shall assume office at the close of the June meeting? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed?
Aye.
1. Any abstentions? Okay, it changes approved. So the second thing is on voting, and we changed this because we haven't been meeting. As you can see at point A, for voting. Voting shall be hand count except in contested elections when a secret ballot shall be used for contested positions. Since we're not meeting in person, we can't do a hand count. So the idea was to propose an amendment to the bylaws. This section on voting for 1 year only. Voting shall be by email or by hand count and in-person meetings. In the case of the
Since we're not having in-person meetings, we should strike that part of the sentence that says or by hand count at in-person meetings.
That's fine.
That allows it either way.
Yeah, right. But we're not going to, yeah, but this is only for a year. So we don't have to have that. So we take that out. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. In the case of email balloting, all eligible Federation delegates will be sent a ballot containing the names and association affiliations of the nominees. Voted ballots must be timely returned to the nominations committee for a vote to be tallied and reported at the June general meeting. That's the proposed amendment. Is there a motion to approve that change?
Yes.
Is there 2 seconds? Is there a second to approve that change?
Yes.
Is there another second?
Yes.
Is there any discussion?
Sure.
Yeah, I stand still. I guess my hand's down. I don't understand if you're returning ballots, how you plan to return ballots if we're doing it by electronically. How do you consider a return ballot?
We'll send you an email with the nominees and
You mail it back?
Yes, you'd email it back.
Email it back.
Yeah, just
And who? Okay.
And we'll send it to the chair of the nominations committee or to the whole committee. We haven't decided on that yet. We just wanted.
And you will set a date by which the ballots are due back in the email?
Yes. Yes. Any other questions? Harry, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering why we can't vote, the people who attend the meeting, why we can't vote that way like we have been doing, like raise your hand or hold your hand up on the camera. That's how we do it in our association. We don't email votes. Like, how are you going to verify? I don't know. It just seems cumbersome to me.
It's not a secret ballot when you do it that way.
We were going to send it to everybody who's registered as a delegate, so that's how.
Oh, I see. Secret ballot. Okay. You want secret ballot. I got it. Okay. Thank you.
Peggy?
Yes, can we go down to the bottom part of B where it says at a scheduled in-person meeting? All of that and what follows is irrelevant since we're not having an in-person meeting. Can we just strike all that unnecessary wordage?
Sure.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so as amended, any other discussion?
Call the
Can I
question.
just say one more thing?
Sure.
I'm just kind of chuckling at a secret ballot because our elections since I've been here have been uncontested. So I don't know if you need a secret ballot, but that's just
true.
comment.
We don't know. It said just picked up some of the language from the current bylaws. Any more discussion? Call the question then. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
Alan,
Okay.
let me mention just a clarification to you. On a slate of officers, if you have a prepared slate, you don't have to have a secret ballot. You could have the secretary cast a unanimous vote for the slate and elect the whole slate in public.
Yeah, well, nominations committee, as far as I know, hasn't met yet, so we don't know where we are with that yet.
Yeah.
Okay. The last two things are, this is sort of formality. I wasn't sure whether or not this was required by the bylaws, but at our executive committee meeting, we agreed on an awards committee to include myself and Peggy Dennis as co-chairs with members Jay Elvov, Dan Mayer, and Jerry Garson. Members will nominate awardees for the Star Cup, the Wayne Goldstein Award, and the Sentinel Award. So is there a motion to approve this awards committee?
It's already in the bylaws, Alan.
But these particular people.
Oh, okay.
So
These particular people. Is there a motion? Yes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Another second?
Don't need one.
All right, thanks. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? Abstentions? Okay, congratulations to our awards committee awardees. I recommended the following people to be members of the 2024 nominations committee. The first vice president and president are not eligible to serve. We recommended Jerry Garson as chair, and the members, Liz Joyce, Jackie Boko, Dick Caffinger, Ira Unger, Ken Markinson, and Chris Reynolds. Is there a motion to approve that group?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there another second?
Only one.
Any discussion?
Yeah, this is Jerry. If this is approved, we'll try to get a Zoom meeting next week.
Okay, Jerry, so that's the discussion. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Well, thank everybody for going along with that. We tried to make the best of a, not great situation, and we think this is a good solution. And looking forward to anybody who's got nominations for the awards for the Star Cup, the Wayne Goldstein Award, and Sentinel Award. Please send them to Peggy and I, or to, I guess, info@montgomerycivic.org. Jackie, yes. And you'll hear from the nominations committee soon. Goes after 10 o'clock. I suggest that we not have our committee reports. I would just mention that we did have a special committee, an ad hoc committee on housing that's done its work. It's produced a white paper. We'll prepare a resolution that encompasses the points from that white paper for consideration by
Alan,
the
before we adjourn, I want to call your attention to read page 9 of the bylaws on the awards committee, because you should look at that. The second point.
What's it say?
Awards committee shall be established to make recommendations. The president shall call for volunteers to serve on the committee at the September meeting. Members shall be nominated by the president and confirmed by the executive committee at the November executive committee meeting.
So we're a few months behind.
We're a few months behind or ahead, depending which way you're looking at it.
Well, we're behind and ahead, but we have had notices in the newsletter every month since last September. So I'm pretty sure we did meet that requirement, and it was only when nobody responded that we sort of pushed the issue on getting members and having this process going forward. So that's where we are. So I appreciate it. As always, if anybody wants to submit an article for the Civic Federation newsletter, they're always due to our newsletter editor, Jackie Boko, by the 26th of the month. So April 26th is when we'll receive your articles for the newsletter.
Arbor Day.
On Arbor Day. And there's a lot of other things going on. Please pay attention to the Civic Federation Facebook page, where we post interesting articles and let people know about interesting meetings that are coming up. And please, if you've got any comments on attainable housing or affordable housing, please send them to us so we have the benefit of those comments, and we can bring them into our work. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Alan, I
Yes.
have a couple of things. I just was wondering, can the Civic Fed, will the Civic Fed still send comments about attainable housing? Because Lisa said that it's ongoing, even though we didn't comment at the hearing.
Yes, that's our plan.
Okay. Secondly, will the Civic Fed submit testimony on the county budget and specifically supporting the funding for the People's Council?
Yes, Peggy's testifying tomorrow for the Civic Fed, and she's going to talk particularly about a program that we've initiated with Montgomery County Department of Transportation, but she'll have some introductory language about how we appreciate the county executive for reflecting our priorities in his operating budget recommendations. And in that conversation is a note about the Office of the People's Council.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Peggy.
Peggy, what time is that? What time
Alan's
is that?
trying to provide that for me.
What time is that?
1:30 to 3:30.
Okay, I'll get it to you sometime tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Night.
I think we've adjourned. See you
Good
next
night.
month.
Night.
Bye.
Hope everybody enjoyed the eclipse today.
It was great. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.